Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. I'm Hillary Gowans. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Policy Shop. I'm Hillary Gowans. Labor Day is the traditional beginning for political races, and this year one of the biggest political pushes for organized labor, particularly government union bosses, is Amendment 1. Mailee Smith, staff attorney and director of labor policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, is here to help us understand what Amendment 1 is and how it would affect all of us here in Illinois if it passes this November. Mailee, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so at the top of the ballot, before you get to vote for governor or your state representative or any of that, you have to vote yes or no on Amendment 1.
That's
and
right.
To tee this up, I wanted to start by sharing with listeners an excerpt from a Wall Street Journal editorial piece that ran on August 29th. The title of the piece was "A Big Labor Takeover in Illinois." And the editorial board writes, "Public unions already dominate government in Illinois, and Democratic lawmakers now want to amend the Constitution to entrench that power and block reforms. Those are the stakes of Amendment 1, which will appear on the November ballot." Again, that piece is called "A Big Labor Takeover in Illinois." So that's the broad strokes from a national newspaper. But what do voters in Illinois need to know, top line, about this amendment, Mailee?
Yeah, top line, this is a hidden tax hike. This isn't about workers' rights. It is about providing expanded bargaining power to government union bosses. That is going to drive up taxes because it's going to cost more to run the government. So when these costly government contracts are negotiated, who's going to be paying for that? That's the taxpayers. And we have conservatively estimated that it will guarantee a $2,100 property tax hike for the average household in Illinois over the next 4 years, but it's probably going to be much more than that. And I would also say people need to know this is going to solidify Illinois' reputation as one of the worst places in the nation for businesses. Businesses leaving the state have already cited Illinois' poor business climate and their high taxes. The Tax Foundation's Business Tax Climate Index found that Illinois saw the second largest decline in business tax climate ranking in the nation since 2017. So we are already seeing businesses leave the state, jobs leave the state, and that current exodus of jobs is going to get worse, and the economy is going to suffer more if Amendment 1 is passed.
Yeah, and we're about 2 months out from the election now, and so campaigning and ads are starting to really ramp up. And we've already seen an interesting commercial for the pro Amendment 1 side, the big labor union proponents. They came out with an ad talking about how Amendment 1 would expand protections and all of that for nurses. And that's not necessarily right, is it?
It's not right at all. So first of all, that commercial is incredibly misleading, as is the website that accompanies the proponents' campaign for this amendment. They are claiming that this guarantees rights for all Illinoisans. They actually use that, all Illinoisans, for all employees. It can't do that. First of all, it cannot apply to private sector employees. So that's a vast majority of employees in the state of Illinois. So it's very misleading, purposefully so, for them to say that this is going to apply to this broad range of workers, particularly nurses, like in the commercial where, the implication in that commercial is private sector. It can't do that because the federal government already occupies that space. And in terms of government workers, it does apply to government workers. That's only about 7% of our adult population here in Illinois, but they're really not getting any new rights. They already have broad protections under our state laws. This isn't going to give workers a better workplace. It's going to give union bosses more political clout. And we see how they use that, and we see how they use that to the detriment of workers themselves. We've seen Chicago Teachers Union go on strike repeatedly to the detriment of teachers. And we've talked with some of them, like Ifoma Nakemdi. She has a Your Story on the Illinois Policy website, how she crossed the line and the union went after her. So we know that union bosses really aren't in it for the workers. They're definitely not in it for the people of Illinois. They're in it for power. This amendment is going to give them more power for those union bosses, less power for the people of Illinois.
So let's get back to what Amendment 1 actually would do, because you've broken this down pretty clearly. If it's not about giving workers more rights, then what does this amendment encompass?
So this is a first of its kind constitutional amendment. It is, I've been describing it as like a beast of an amendment. It's quite long. It includes multiple provisions. So I'll break those down. So first of all, it grants a fundamental right to unionize to government employees. That is on par with speech and religion, those rights that we hold dear. It expands bargaining beyond wages and benefits. So those typical things that we think about with negotiations, it goes beyond that to include broad, new, undefined subjects like economic welfare. That's not defined anywhere in law. It's not defined in federal law. That is a new subject, and it's very vague, and it gives union bosses the power to demand virtually anything in negotiations. It also prohibits lawmakers as the people's representatives from passing taxpayer-friendly reforms. And then the last provision, it bans right to work in the state of Illinois. We're not a right to work state anyway, so that one really doesn't do anything for Illinois. So what all of this together, what this means is that there's no limit on what government union bosses can demand. There's no limit on what they can go on strike over, because it will be a permanent right to strike. There's no limit on what government leaders can give away. And who is going to be forced to pay for these, new wide range of demands? It's going to be the taxpayers. And that's why I think no other state has any one of these provisions, let alone all four of them. There's a reason. There are dire consequences that will come from this, including, this guaranteed tax hike for the people of Illinois and the solidification of Illinois' reputation as being a terrible place to do business.
So if this is a first of its kind amendment and it's a beast of an amendment, as you put it, why now? Why do you think government labor leaders push this through for the 2022 election? Why now?
I think there's a couple reasons. First of all, the timing was probably right for this to go through easily, because the Democrats, who are very aligned with the unions, they have a supermajority. They had a supermajority anyway in our General Assembly, and a Democrat governor. So it was easier for them to get it on the ballot during this time period. But I think they saw a need for it because union members, government union members, are leaving their unions. We know that since 2017, at least 9% of government workers have left their unions, and they are expressing dissatisfaction with the way that the unions represent them or fail to do so. That includes nearly 10% of teachers and public school employees have left their unions. And I think this is concerning to the government unions. When you lose 10% of your membership, that is a big chunk of change that they're losing every year in dues. And actually, we've estimated about $38 million a year in dues that they're losing from these members that are leaving. And I think this amendment is a way for them to permanently, even if they're losing members, to permanently grab onto power in the state of Illinois, regardless of whether or not their members are happy with what they're doing.
It's really interesting to look at the supporters and the opponents of this amendment, and you've done a nice job of putting together that list. I'll just read off a few so we can give listeners an opportunity to understand the divide here. So people who have filed in support of Amendment 1, so people who want Amendment 1, groups that want Amendment 1, AFSCME, Chicago Teachers Union, Illinois Federation of Teachers, SEIU, the Teamsters. These are just a few of the proponents, people who want Amendment 1. Now, groups that have filed in opposition to Amendment 1, they don't think that Amendment 1 is a good idea. Illinois Association of School Boards, that's interesting. The Chamber of Commerce, Illinois Manufacturers Association, National Federation of Independent Business. And that's not the complete list, but you kind of sense the split here. So who's on both sides of the aisle and why?
So the proponents are almost exclusively unions. And you'll notice a number of those that you read are government sector units. They're government worker unions. And it's because they're the ones that stand to gain from this. We've talked about this in some of our materials, but this amendment will actually allow government unions to override state law through their collective bargaining agreements. So because their collective bargaining agreements will be elevated under this amendment to the level of the Constitution, and because there's already some precedent in Illinois for some government unions to be able to trump state law through their collective bargaining agreements, this amendment makes that apply to everybody, all government unions. So they have an opportunity to basically pass laws without actually passing laws by just writing it into their collective bargaining agreement. They can skip the lawmakers altogether and just put what they want the law to be in their collective bargaining agreements. So they have a lot to gain, those government union bosses. On the other side, we have the businesses and government associations and school board associations, like you mentioned, the people that are going to lose a lot if this amendment passes, which is the majority of people. Like I said, only 7% of adults in the state work for the state or local government. So the majority of people are going to lose from this. Like it is a tax hike. Everyone's taxes are going to be raised because of this. And particularly at this time in our state and in our nation, that is not something that people can afford. And we can't afford to see more Caterpillars and Boeings and Citadels leaving the state of Illinois and going to greener pastures in other states where they do have a business-friendly and a taxpayer-friendly climate.
What's the most important thing voters need to know about Amendment 1?
When voters go into that booth on election day and they see this amendment, the first thing on their ballot, what they need to remember is that this is going to hike their taxes. It is going to make government cost more, and the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it. It's going to cost them more when they are going along in their daily lives. And they need to remember that this is going to solidify Illinois' reputation as one of the worst states in the nation to do business. We see major employers already taking steps to leave. We know that small businesses aren't going to be able to afford the tax hikes that come along with this amendment. So when people are looking at that ballot and they are considering what they're going to do, they need to remember this is going to hike their taxes and it's going to make Illinois an unfriendly place for businesses and particularly small businesses.
Well, Mailee, thanks so much for walking us through this issue. Again, this is going to be the top of the ballot, the first thing that anyone votes on. And it's important that we spread the word on, well, what is Amendment 1 and what would it actually do? So thanks for doing that for us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great, thank you.
Listen and subscribe to The Policy Shop wherever you get your podcasts.